start. So hello, everyone, and welcome to the first event of our British Institute for Libyan and Northern African Studies lecture series for 2024-25. Tonight, we will have our event entitled Recent Work on Inscriptions in Libya, celebrating the legacy of Joyce Reynolds. Now, of course, as many of you will know, the late Joyce Reynolds was one of the leading scholars and pioneers in the field of Libyan archaeology and epigraphy in the 20th and 21st centuries. She was also, of course, one of the founding members of BILNAS, or as it was known then, the Society for Libyan Studies. This month, it has been just over 2 years since she passed, and we thought at BILNAS that this was a good time and opportunity, not only to remember and celebrate Joyce's life and her work, but also to look forward at the ways that her work continues to impact current and future studies. And so we are very pleased today to have not one, as usual, but 3 speakers to talk to us about the legacy and ongoing impact of Joyce Reynolds' work in the field of Libyan inscriptions. So just before we start, just a very quick note. If you have any questions for any of the speakers, please write them in the Q&A box, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. And we will hold the questions and discussion until the end of our 3 presentations. So to start us off with a more thorough introduction than I've just given you, our first speaker this evening will be Professor Catherine Dobias-Lalou. After graduating in classics from the Sorbonne, Catherine was maître des conférences in ancient Greek at the same university for 20 years. After her habilitation, she went on to become professor at the Université de Bourgogne in Dijon, and after 14 years was elected emeritus professor in 2003, and she continues to remain active in research. In this time, her research has widened from the study of the ancient Greek dialect to reading and publishing the inscriptions of Cyrenaica, including the publication of Inscriptions of Greek Cyrenaica and the Greek verse inscriptions of Cyrenaica online in 2017 and the 2nd edition in 2024. Catherine has been a member of the French archaeological mission in Libya since 1976, where she had the opportunity to meet Joyce Reynolds, of course, and work with her there and in Europe. So please, Catherine, if you would share your screen and give us your introduction.
Thank you very much. I'll share my screen. Voilà. Thank you very much. And first of all, I want to thank heartily BILNAS and especially Nicole Sheldrick for organizing this event and inviting me to introduce it. I took up both as a pleasure and as an honor this opportunity of celebrating Joyce Reynolds' legacy about Libyan history. Joyce's relation with Libya is a long life story. Her first visit having taken place in 1948 in Tripolitania, and soon after in Cyrenaica, where she is seen here, and the last one having taken place in 2008 in Cyrenaica. None amongst the other epigraphists having worked in Libya may compete with a similar duration. Those visits allowed her to be very well known in Libya, where she made numerous friends, being kind to everyone and always ready for sharing her knowledge in a simple and direct way. The inscriptions were her main concern. She was always keen on climbing on cliffs or ruins so as to copy and read some inscribed letters, never afraid of tiring trips to remote places. Her penetrating look and deep knowledge of both Latin and Greek allowed her to read badly damaged stones. And as a learned historian, she would offer precise and convincing interpretations. Another aspect of her personality was her dedication to collaborative work, which resulted in several types of publication. She edited the unfinished works of colleagues, Goodchild's Libyan Studies in 1976, and Ward Perkins and Goodchild's Caution Monuments in 2003, which in fact contains a fair amount of her own. She published the inscriptions found by archaeological teams. Apollonia in 1976. Sidi Krebish Berenice in 78, following the excavation by the Libyan Society of Libyan Studies. The Jewish inscriptions for Luderit's dissertation, published 83. Demeter's Sanctuary, excavation by the American team at Cyrene, was published in 2012. And I forgot one, which is not written here, which is a chapter in Krailing's book about Ptolemais. I don't remember exactly the year. She organized 2 conferences in Cambridge about Cyrenaica, one in 83, published with Graham Barker and John Lloyd 2 years later, and one in 93, published the next year. And also one about Tripolitania in 1984, published with Buck and Mattingly the next year. She wrote about 25 papers co-authored with Libyan or Western colleagues. Moreover, she was also the only author of more than 40 papers on Libyan antiquities. Those numerous publications, mostly aimed at quick information and or discussion, behind which a more synthetic work was to come, what we call a corpus, that is a thorough collection of all inscriptions from a region. In fact, the inscriptions of Roman Tripolitania, prepared with Ward Perkins and a series of other scholars, this book, published in 52, prepared with Ward Perkins, were the first printed publication of Joyce, who provided a supplement of her own in 55. A second edition, the first digital one, appeared in 2009 with help of Charlotte Rouchet and Gabriel Bodard, adding Joyce's translations and the photographs from Ward Perkins' archives kept at BSR. The next step was IRT 2021, including many supplementary entries, especially the ostraca of Bourgogne, and a better consideration for the Punic and Latino-Punic inscription. That innovation, publishing online, was decisive and acted as an example for the Greek and Latin inscriptions of Cyrenaica. Joyce's part, resulting in IRC 2020, was the most conspicuous, with about 2,400 entries, wonderfully edited from her manuscript by Charlotte Rouchet and Gabriel Bodard, providing text, translations, commentary, bibliography, and images of all the inscriptions of the Roman and Byzantine period in Cyrenaica. It was desired long since by everyone interested into the ancient history of Libya as a counterpart of the Tripolitanian corpus. Joyce's achievements are surviving her and will continue for a long time, the more so that a numerous team is involved in carrying the work on, as will be explained by Caroline Barron and Alessandra Giovenco. Beyond that, Joyce's legacy is and will be a long-lasting one. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Catherine. That was a wonderful introduction to Joyce's work and her body of work over a long career. So our next speaker will be Dr. Caroline Barron. Caroline is an ancient historian in the Department of Classics and Ancient History at Durham University, which she joined in 2021. The focus of her research is the cultural and historical significance of Latin epigraphy from antiquity to the present day. She's interested in how people, both ancient and modern, responded to Latin inscriptions, how their texts were composed and read, and what epigraphy contributed to the landscape of antiquity. Carolyn was research assistant on the 2009 digital edition of the Inscriptions of Roman Tripolitania, and she worked on the digital second edition, contributing the bilingual neo-punic texts to IRT 2021. Together with Dr. Gabriel Bodard, Caroline will edit the future digital editions of IRT as well. And so her talk today is entitled Inscriptions of Roman Tripolitania, Past, Present, and Future. So please, Caroline.
Thank you, Nicole. I will just share my PowerPoint with you. Excellent, thank you. So thank you very much for having me this evening. As Nicole just mentioned, I started working as a research assistant, a very naive research assistant on the inscriptions of Roman Tripolitania, the 2009 digital edition. And really, it was the most surreptitious career moment for me because working with Joyce's material and alongside Charlotte Ruchet and Gabriel Bodard, opened up an entirely new world of epigraphy to me. And so I'm delighted to try and do some of that justice today. So between 1948 and 1952, John Ward Perkins, the then director of the British School at Rome, and Joyce Reynolds, then based there, and assisted by Richard Goodchild, undertook an archaeological survey of Libya and of the ancient province of Tripolitania, where they recorded all the extant inscriptions that they could find and documented them in hundreds of photographs. The result was, of course, the 1952 publication, The Inscriptions of Roman Tripolitania. It contained 973 inscriptions, to which a further 23 were added in a supplement published by the Papers of the British School at Rome in 1955. Although a remarkable publication for its time, Inscriptions of Roman Tripolitania contained in 1952 very little geographic information about the find spots of the inscriptions and only 30 plates of photographs, which did not do justice to the number that Ward Perkins and Joyce had taken and which were available for consultation at the BSR. In the early 2000s, work began at the BSR to make the full photographic record available online. And in 2008, the BSR entered into a partnership with an international team led by Charlotte Ruchet and Gabriel Bodard to publish a digital edition of the entire 1952 publication, which was published online as Inscriptions of Roman Tripolitania 2009. Going digital provided a huge opportunity because it meant that it was now possible to provide the full photographic record, something that Alessandra is going to tell us more about, together with geographical data linking the inscriptions to maps and to gazetteers, and so to other resources. It offered greater functionality, such as free search texts as well. Now, in order to produce the digital edition, the inscriptions were encoded using something called epidoc. This was a new set of guidelines and tools that are a subset of the Text Encoding Initiative, or TEI, the TEI's XML standard for the representation of text in digital form. So for those of you who may not be familiar with XML, and do be assured that in 2008, when I joined Gabby and Charlotte working on this, I had absolutely no idea what XML stood for, or TEI for that matter either. XML is a language that's used in computer programming to define data. It stands for Extensible Markup Language. It's just a way of encoding the data that you want the computer to understand. It's essentially a way of encoding the inscription. So we used Epidoc as a set of guidelines to represent the way that we wanted the inscriptions to look on the screen, encoding the inscriptions with standardized rules to describe the transcription and the editorial treatment of the texts, as well as giving us the opportunity to encode information about their material history as well. Now, these Epidoc guidelines are based on the 1931 Leiden Conventions that have been used to edit and publish inscriptions since that date. The Leiden Conventions established a common set of symbols for describing the textual condition of an inscription. For example, which words were abbreviated in the text, which ones were damaged but able to be restored by the editor, where letters had become unclear due to the condition of the stone. Epidoc was developed to do exactly the same, but for publication of digital editions of ancient documents, and especially for inscriptions and papyri. So some early examples of Epidoc in use was the digital platform Inscriptions of Aphrodisias, the Vindolanda tablets, and this is how we prepared the inscriptions for digital publication. IRT 2009's digitized inscriptions had also been exported to the EDH, the Epigraphische Datenbank Heidelberg, which also published using Epidoc, and where material that had been recorded in Tripolitania since 1952 had also been added. And it became clear as we explored the EDH digitization that the corpus was significantly bigger than the digitization of the 1952 volume had allowed for. And that meant that much more was possible. In 2017, another platform became available. This was EFES, or the Epidoc Front-End Services, which is a delivery search and browse platform that can be set up and customized for individual projects that are using Epidoc XML. The value of EFES is that it allows you as the editor to see the published version while you're working, which is a complete game changer. When we were preparing the 2009 edition of the 1952 volume, we could spend days and days working on encoding the inscriptions, only to have to wait for several weeks afterwards in order to see what the finished result looked like. With the development of EFES, we could share our work as we were editing, and so that gave us the opportunity to solicit expertise from those who aren't necessarily literate in Epidoc itself or in XML, but who can and should be advising us on what the published edition of the inscription should look like. So with this development, Charlotte was further inspired to republish and enhance our digital edition of IRT so that it might exist as a repository of all currently published Latin, Greek, and eventually neo-punic inscriptions from Tripolitania. So for this, she received a grant from the then Society of Libyan Studies, and we published it in 2021. By creating the new site using EFES, we were able to share it in its pilot form with other colleagues who were far more expert than us and invite their contributions. Which brings me to the present-ish, and I'm sure I can hear Charlotte murmuring in the background that 2021 is already too far in the past and that we need to start updating the present. All the inscriptions in IRT 2021 have previously been published elsewhere from the 1952 volume and then the subsequent publications since. They were assembled and curated by Charlotte Rouchet and Gabriel Bodard, but we received contributions, guidance and support from many other colleagues whose names you can see on the screen. The resulting corpus is much, much larger. We now have 1,651 inscriptions included, although we expect there are more recently published texts that we have missed and which we will include in future digital editions. The new site has vastly improved search functionality, largely due to a very rich system of indexing that allows users to search by means of a much bigger range of categories. Now, one major addition to the corpus, so some of the search terms, but the major addition that represented a big change from 1952 and 2009's editions was the inclusion of the neo-punic texts of the multilingual inscriptions from Tripolitania. So for clarity, what we're talking about is a series of bilingual and trilingual inscriptions which record versions of the same text in Latin and or Greek, and neo-punic, which was of course the spoken and written dialect of Punic that arose in Libya after the fall of Carthage in 146 BCE. You can see the neo-punic in the bottom two lines of the inscription on your screen there. It's read from right to left. It's a phonetic script without any vowels that differed from the earlier Punic language due to the dialectical changes that evolved as its use spread among the Berber peoples of North Africa following the Roman conquest. Now, Joyce and John Wall Perkins had not recorded the neo-Punic text in the 1952 publication. They did indicate when neo-Punic texts were present in bilingual or multilingual inscriptions, but they didn't engage with them otherwise. And this is completely fair enough. Very few scholars could engage with them at this point in the 1950s. The understanding of neo-Punic epigraphy was absolutely in its infancy, and a large corpus of material to work on hadn't yet been collected. The 2009 edition of IRT was a digital edition of the 1952 volume and the 1955 PBSR supplement. So the decision not to record the text of the neo-Punic inscriptions then and there was justified. There was also a practical consideration. There's no Unicode script for neo-Punic, and so it's not possible to represent the script online or in print in its untransliterated form. However, given the hundreds of new texts that we were adding to IRT 2021, enhancing it with inscriptions that had been found and published since 1952 allows us to ask the question, why not to add the neo-Punic text to the multilingual inscriptions? They are, of course, part of the dialogue, part of the epigraphic record. We also added 53 inscriptions from a catacomb in Sirte, some of which were inscribed in Latino-Punic, which is neo-Punic rendered for the most part in Latin script. And they're an interesting addition to consider as well. They're the only contemporary testimony for Christianity in Punic, of which St. Augustine and others obviously have had much to say. Now, one of the issues that we faced with the neo-Punic is that it's only partially transmitted. Punicists are not all agreed on the specificities of how the language works. Neo-Punic can often only be distinguished by morphosyntactic context, or how words are formed individually and how they relate to each other in order to give meaning. And we don't always have full access to that due to the relatively small number of neo-Punic inscriptions that have survived. That said, lots of work has been done on neo-Punic inscriptions since 1952. Teams of Italian scholars worked extensively on the texts, eventually publishing the Inscrizioni Puniche della Tripolitania in 1987, which provided transliterations and readings, the majority of which are still largely accepted. And these were also published with a sort of historical and linguistic commentary. More recently, major work has been done by Carol Jongling and Robert Kerr, the latter of whom was a brilliant and enthusiastic collaborator on the inclusion of the neo-Punic material in IRT 2021. Jongling's 2008 Handbook of Neo-Punic Inscriptions catalogues the text from Tripolitania, amongst other locations, and is a vital tool, and Kerr's 2010 Late Punic Epigraphy also added significantly to the corpus. Most importantly for our work, in the last 20 years, the study of neo-Punic has evolved so that they are now transliterated into Latin script and published with more standardized readings than were previously available, although some disagreements between the different schools still exist. You can see the neo-Punic in the bottom section of the transliteration of the inscription that was previously on your screen there, along with the diacritic symbols. There's less focus on attempting to represent visually the direction of the script in print. And crucially, as there are no conventions comparable to the Leiden conventions used for Latin and Greek epigraphy, we had to deal with what to do about symbols utilized by the Leiden conventions that are already in use as linguistic markers in neo-Punic. So, for example, the underdot that we are familiar with in Latin and Greek epigraphy is indicating a letter that is unclear on the stone, exists already in the transliterated neo-Punic as a phonetic symbol. for several letters. So to get around this has involved many conversations with punicists and with each other. We were able to follow conventions that were established by the iSicily project in Oxford for their Punic material, which meant that such conflicts that existed would at least be conflicts that were uniform across our corpora. And it's worth saying here that adding the neo-Punic material to the corpus was absolutely the right thing to do. As we've worked out how to encode their text digitally and to lemmatize the vocabulary, we've had to get much more closely involved with understanding what the language was doing than we were initially prepared for. It's become clear that these neo-Punic inscriptions from Tripolitania sit at the intersection of a really dynamic moment of linguistic development in Tripolitania. 25 years ago, scholarship spoke of neo-Punic as a sort of corrupt Punic, a language that was on its last legs. It represented the end of the use of Punic. And in fact, what we've discovered in the process of working with these texts, adding them to the corpus, is that nothing could be further from the truth. They just used a different orthographic system than had been in place previously. In the case of the bi- and trilingual inscriptions from Tripolitania, we also see a really interesting kind of punification of Roman concepts, which were adopted into Punic civic culture in order to reflect the reality of living alongside Roman rule. Examples such as in this inscription, the titles Ornator Patriae, Armator Concordiae, so adorner of the fatherland, lover of concord. These are a sort of punification of concepts that are given in both the Latin and in the Punic inscriptions texts. And indeed, this punification of the Roman conceptual world is really fascinating. It's a bit like the claims that sort of colloquial Canadian French is bad or Anglified French. This is, of course, not true. It's just a reflection of French speakers living in Canada rather than in France. The language has been adopted to reflect a new reality. And similarly, we see the same taking place with the Neo-Punic. One could be a Punic-speaking Roman. Much Phoenician Punic epigraphy is quite formulaic, except for the early stuff. Punic, like Biblical Hebrew, had no real culture of public epigraphy. That's something that's more common to the Aramaic world, who were clearly influenced by the cuneiform cultures of the Mesopotamian civilization. Neo-Punic, however, really adopts this Latin epigraphic habit. In imitating it, it seems to have sort of taken on a new lease on life, primarily as an oral language, but one that was also able to evolve and to reflect dynamic new concepts in its epigraphy as well. And it's here that there's some really exciting work still to do. Which does, as I'm sure Charlotte will be relieved to hear me say, bring me to the future. IRT 2021 is not the final stage of our work on the inscriptions of Roman Tripolitania, not by any stretch of the imagination. We anticipate further digital editions, which will be enhanced by the inclusion of newly published material, updates to information about dating and about find spots, as well as those texts that have inevitably escaped our detection in this edition. Something that the pandemic surely contributed to, given that libraries and archives were rendered inaccessible for so long. Our first step with the next edition will be to correct these omissions and to work more closely with the community of researchers and heritage and museum professionals in Libya itself to work on how we can better engage with the materials in their inventories and archives too. So Inscriptions of Roman Tripolitania has, since its first incarnation, been a collaborative project, and its continued success relies on that collaboration to be ongoing. So I'll end here with a plea that we welcome interaction with users and researchers working on Libyan epigraphy in all its forms, so that we can continue to improve and build upon our existing platform of work. And so that we continue to build on Joyce's example, one of rigorous scholarship, on an unwavering commitment to collaboration, and a belief that the dissemination of research, rather than gatekeeping, can only be a good thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Caroline. That was really, really interesting. And yes, I actually didn't really know that much about kind of how the digital editions of the RT came to be and all of the work that went into that. So that was really interesting to see kind of the details of how that process all emerged. Okay, so thank you. So moving on, our final speaker of the evening is Alessandra Giovenco. Alessandra is the archivist of the British School at Rome. She has an MA in medieval history and postgraduate certificate in archival science, paleography, and diplomatics from the Archivio Segreto Vaticano. Her research focuses on understudied aspects of the BSR photographic collections to highlight their uniqueness and complexity, and to correct the misconception that they are ancillary to textual research. Her recent publications are concerned with untold stories and significant networks of people revealed by close study of archival objects. Through this research, Alessandra is bringing to light connections between photographic objects within the BSR archive and in collections beyond the BSR. So today she is going to speak to us about memories of Libya and the BSR. So please, Alessandra.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful to BILNAS and Nicole for this invitation. I'm going to share my screen. It was very interesting what Caroline said about further research and a further publication of RT 2021, because we would be very eager to participate in this new enterprise. Several documents held in the BSR archives can help us visualize the circumstances in which the inscriptions of Roman Tripolitania project took place in the late 1940s. This passage from a letter sent by John Bryan Ward Perkins, director of the BSR, to Hugh Last, professor of ancient history at Oxford University, refers to one of the main protagonists of this incredible enterprise, Miss Joyce Reynolds. Joyce's academic career might have taken a different path had it not been for the scholarship in classical studies she obtained in the aftermath of Second World War, which brought her to Rome in 1946. In a talk that took place at the BSR in December 1996, she refers to John Bryan Ward Perkins in this way, quote, "A man who was full of projects. He had spent the war as a soldier and for some time in North Africa. He did particularly serious work in Libya and became very seriously interested in the archaeology of Libya. And one point of which he became very strongly convinced was the need to have a published corpus of inscriptions of Tripolitania." She continues, "So, as a result of this initiative, I was introduced to real epigraphy and became a passionate epigraphist. In the summer of that second year, 1947, I joined the directorial party which went to work in Tripolitania, learned to look an inscribed stone in the face, which is very different indeed from looking at someone's transcription of a text on a printed page in the library. And when IRT was completed, a book which was simple in name but not less useful, moved to a Cyrenaican interest along with Ward Perkins and Richard Goodchild, who had helped the fieldwork for the Tripolitania inscriptions. Why is it so important to understand what this collection is about? The 1952 publication was complemented by a photographic apparatus available for consultation only at the BSR. We have decided that it was worth a while to publish it online as essentially a distinctive product in its own right of the history and context of the archaeological research it documents. Like an excavation, the collection effectively comprises various layers revealing several processes, The first concerns the study of the inscriptions as artifacts, illustrating historical events, people's lives, and activities. These objects were seen and examined in situ in a particular sequence, and photographers were hired. Photographic equipment were brought directly from England to create an up-to-date record of their status quo at a given time. The second activity tells us much about the finding and recording process, partially illustrated by the filing system conceived for the Tripoli inscriptions. In fact, archival evidence from correspondence found in the BSR archives suggests that the work behind this publication was meticulously organized, with a filing system that would help arrange the sequence of inscriptions during the preparation of the materials and facilitate access to them for the various authors involved in the enterprise. As you can see, the letter S identifies Sabratha, while L is used for Leptis Magna and O for Oea. Finally, assembling, annotating, and editing so many photographs would entail activities relating to putting a collection together, which can reveal much of the research process. The way photographs and negatives are assembled and presented tells us a great deal about the methodology adopted for the study of these inscriptions. As far as the ART collection is concerned, a crucial outcome of such endeavor is the 1,200 photographic prints glued onto nearly 300 cards supporting the publication. Neatly arranged according to the numbers assigned to each inscription that you see marked in red, the photographs provide users with visual evidence of what is accurately described in the text. Most of the photographs were held by the Antiquities Department at that time, or Soprintendenza alle Antichità e agli Scavi, and by the BSR, respectively cited as SOPR and BSR. While we're sure about the dates of the BSR photographs taken between 1946 and 1953, and most of which have been inventoried by date and by a 35mm stripe number, we know very little about the chronological references of the images belonging to the Antiquities Department. These might be dated even earlier. An example from the Warperkins collection is this photograph from the Soprintendenza, which dates back to 1937. Unsurprisingly, the way the RT photographs are arranged and can be physically browsed through in the archive reflects an organizational practice that mirrors other series in the same archival collection. On the left of your screen, you see an example of how Warperkins, with the help of his wife Margaret, organized the pictures of the numerous photographic Libyan campaigns. At the same time, on the right-hand side, you can appreciate the arrangement of another pioneering survey conducted in Italy, in the South Etruria region, between 1950s and the early 1970s. This family community-driven archival practice is one of the attributes of the BSR's visual identity, at least for the period concerned with Warperkins' directorship. But going back to our inscriptions, when we started to discuss how we wanted this collection of photographs to be digitally represented and accessible online, we thought it appropriate to provide not only a description at the item level, for example, the single photograph, but also to include the description as well as the image of the card in which each photograph had been glued. By presenting the archival context and the photo layout, we aimed to ensure that information about content and context was also provided to users, especially regarding the original provenance and the original creation of the photo collection. We needed to allow online users to grasp the work done by researchers in assembling the cards for the printed publication. Before starting the cataloging process, we analyzed the structure of the archival collection and its association with the printed publication. We immediately realized that it would have been essential for users to access the individual items and the relevant cards together. We had to address various issues concerning the call numbers and the sorting of the photographs as well as of the cards. Even if publishing a collection online seems to facilitate browsing through it, there are some negotiations to fulfill in terms of what the system can do and what the IT developers can offer. Before starting such projects, many considerations must be made, and careful planning is necessary if one of the project's aims is to make a collection interoperable and linked open data compliant. Looking at various examples from this collection, we can make some observations about questions these photographs may prompt. In this card, for example, you can see the same subject depicted in two photographs, the same subject but approached differently. It's the third line, the photographs identified with 48, 15, Roman numbers 16, and DLM 1614 Leica. We do not know who took the photograph, but we assumed for the BSR it was Ward Perkins. Very recently, though, and through research conducted in the archives, we gathered that numerous photographs were commissioned from Franco Liberati, familiarly addressed as Nino, who was working for the Soprintendenza alle Antichità as a photographer. The BSR was therefore taking advantage of his skills and presence in Libya to create a series or dedicated series of photographs for subsequent analysis. The comparison of both photographs and their context can give us some hint about the differences between the two archival collections. The photograph from the BSR is on the left, as you can see, and that of the Soprintendenza delle Antichità is on the right. BSR archival practice is juxtaposed with another approach to organizing and presenting a collection of images of the same artifacts. As far as the chronological sequence of the photographs belonging to the BSR is concerned, what we understand is that the 35mm stripes were numbered with an identifier made up of the year of the photographic campaign, as you may see, the photograph on top, 47, the number of the roll, third roll, usually expressed in Roman numerals, and the number of the shot. In our case, on the screen, you see 16 for photograph with inscription 851, and the subsequent shot is numbered 17. In this example, we can deduce that two shots were taken one after another and perhaps on the same day. With such information, we could chronologically map the research itineraries and/or research interests of the people involved in the excavations, roll by roll. Finally, from this card, we derive additional information about photographs that were not attributed to the Soprintendenza delle Antichità or the BSR. By cross-referencing the information on the card with the text in the publication, we identified a date and another and added Richard Goodchild to the list of people who played an important role in this common endeavor. And you see, this is the photograph on top of your screen. And you see the initials of Richard Goodchild, RGG. Unfortunately, such visual apparatus was available for consultation only at the BSR, as we said earlier. For very few of the images used by Perkins and Reynolds to support the exposition in the book were actually included in the volume. In 2009, and to maintain the spirit of the earlier collaboration, the purpose of the first digital edition of IRT was to provide online access to the numerous photographs deposited at the BSR, even though their online presentation was ancillary to the browsing and understanding of texts. The same can be said of the second edition issued in 2021. In fact, not much attention was given to the photographic objects themselves or to the cards on which they had been glued. And for obvious reasons, content prevailed over context. But the second digital edition of IRT offered further enhancements and provided links to a set of resources with stable uniform resource identifiers, such as the Heritage Gazetteer of Libya. As we shall see, this newer edition proved extremely important for the metadata infrastructure of IRT photographs and cards. We are therefore very grateful to the British Academy, BILNAS, and Professor Charlotte Ruchet, Caroline Barron, all the researchers involved in the project, for their continuous encouragement in all aspects BILNAS BSR related, which are mirrored in both institutional archives. Thanks to their support, in 2022, we finally published the BSR IRT series online and added metadata that link up both to the second digital edition of IRT and the Heritage of Libya Gazetteer. As said before, the IRT collection on the BSR digital platform can be browsed by searching by cards as well as by single photograph. When clicking on a photographic item, the association with its relevant card and other images within the same context appears. Often, a single photograph may depict more than one inscription or piece of inscription, and therefore, browsing through digital objects turns out to be a completely different experience from what readers and users can achieve by accessing the same items physically. Earlier, we mentioned two fantastic online resources that enabled us to create links through our photographic collection, the Heritage Gazetteer of Libya and the second digital edition of IRT 2021. We look forward to see further enhancements. We have immediately benefited from both of them, and this linking will greatly enhance our exposure on the web. You can see the linking, the external links are published in our records. Work on places and people, according to a linked open data framework, will also be crucial in the near future, given the recently established collaboration with other British international research institutes, which are laying the foundations of a common digital archive. BSR and BILNAS also shared their metadata and photographs of Libyan expeditions on another platform called NAHAN, North African Heritage Archives Network, supported through the French National Research Infrastructure. The bond between the two institutions, which started through mutual exchange and was nurtured by the work of Joyce Reynolds, Owen Bourgogne, John Bryan Perkins, Richard Goodchild, and other renowned academics, is getting even more robust. I want to end this presentation by recalling what Joyce Reynolds remembered about her experience at the BSR. For her, it was a place of encounters, new possibilities, and directions that had an enormous impact on her life and academic career. She was able to give back even more with her generosity and dedication to both institutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandra. That was, yeah, a really wonderful look at the work that you're doing in the BSR at the moment. I always love seeing those old archival photographs and everything. They're such a wonderful, wonderful resource. So just to remind everyone in the audience, if you have any questions, please put them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and I will read them out to ask our speakers to respond. Okay, well, we just have a comment from Charlotte Ruchet, who says, really splendid, many thanks. I agree, Charlotte, thank you. I was really struck by both, I think, Alessandra and Caroline's talks. You both discussed obviously a lot of processes that involve things like digitization, but I think what you both really demonstrated was that digitization, of course, is so very important as a technical process in terms of preservation and increasing accessibility, but also sometimes it's not always recognized that engaging with the material in a new way, in a new format, actually really gives us the opportunity to move research forward. And so it's really wonderful in the ways that, yeah, we're taking a lot of the work that Joyce kind of founded in the material that she was working with, but really finding new ways to engage with it and finding new audiences for it. Yes, so do we have any questions or comments from anyone else? While people are thinking, perhaps I have one question for Caroline, actually. So you mentioned how sort of how neo-punic was kind of considered to be or has been sort of as a kind of lesser version of Punic or Phoenician, drawing this great parallel to Canadian French. And I assume this view is something that is, from modern scholars, that there's this kind of things, but so do we have ancient evidence that neo-Punic was actually considered in ancient times to be a, lesser version? This is not my area of expertise at all, so I don't.
No, it's a great question. And actually, I mean, to be completely honest with our audience as well, I'm an accidental neo-punicist, and one who has emerged entirely because of the work on IRT. So I'm certainly not the expert, but we do have references to neo-Punic, or they just call it Punic, in ancient sources, who sort of refer to it's still being spoken amongst kind of particularly small communities, and the inference from much of it is that this is a dying language. It's not something that is thriving or continuing to evolve. And what's fascinating with the inscriptions, particularly these bilingual and trilingual texts from Tripolitania, is that the absolute opposite is true, and you can see the language literally evolving from inscription to inscription. It's certainly a language and a script that is in very practical use in very particular circumstances. So I think we tend to sort of put too much of a sort of modern lens on the literacy aspect, and sort of, we're not looking for full competency and full use of language in the way that we are familiar with, in order to recognize the continuation and continued use of a language in an ancient context. And neo-Punic, certainly, once you stop looking for that, it becomes clear just how dynamic a script and a language it is.
Absolutely, thank you. Okay, yes, so we do have a question now from Nadia Obeidi, who says, brilliant talks. Having visited Cyrene last month, it's amazing to see all the sites, but after the storm Daniel, lots of sites have been damaged and some new ones have emerged. Are there any plans to visit the sites now? I think to any speaker who... oh, sorry, Catherine, were you? I think amongst our speakers, that is probably a no. Then
Yeah.
I am aware that, of course, many of our Libyan colleagues are, from the DOA, are out there working I know of a few different projects that have been out, particularly, yes, in the wake of, excuse me, Storm Daniel, recording many of these new sites, especially along the coast around Derna. Yes, but I think it, you know, it remains difficult for foreign missions. I know some people are returning to Libya, which is wonderful, but it does remain difficult. But yes, you know, our Libyan colleagues are working very, very hard under very difficult conditions to record these sites. Does anyone want to add anything to this?
No, yes, that's why it's so important that we publish online research that is deposited in our archives or institutions, because this is kind of encouragement to do more for the protection of the Libyan cultural heritage in such difficult circumstances. So this is one of the aims, I think, of continuing research and continue to publish online and put in archival resources together and dig out more into our archival documentation.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so our next question we have from Philip Kenrick, who says, apologies for a technical question. He says, I noticed that IRT 2021, a wholly digital resource, cites an ISBN as a book, brackets 978 dash something. And he says, I'm intrigued as to how this relationship between digital and printed work functions.
Well, yes, eagle eyes there. There was a lot of discussion about whether or not we wanted to publish IRT 2021 as with an ISBN number. Charlotte decided to, largely because ISBN numbers are fixed publications, or they represent fixed publications. So any change to IRT 2021, the digital platform that we might make beyond really sort of silly typos, constitutes a change to the data that is available to scholars who want to refer to an item in that resource. So any change in content, any addition of images, new links, that changes the data reference. So IRT 2021, IRSIRE as well, I think, are fixed as they are at present and can be cited as secure references, which is why there is a necessity for future editions as more material is published and more information comes to light from archives, from hopefully in the future working more closely with our Libyan colleagues to utilise the material in their archives and their inventories. We can update the publication with more information. But by going back into IRT 2021 and making changes sort of in a live capacity, we're altering the data that is available and that can therefore be referenced. I hope that answers the question.
Great, thank you, Caroline. Charlotte has just added a comment. She said the other function of an ISBN is to encourage librarians to add the item to their catalog. Next question we have from Valeria Vitale. She says, thank you all, very interesting talks. I wanted to ask Alessandra if they have actually started mapping the photographs, tracing back the itineraries of the researchers, and if not, I'd love to talk more about it.
I'd like to. I really love to do that, because we have, you know, all those sequences, and I just tried with an experiment by using story maps to do that and to give a sense and a feel of possible mapping of research itineraries. But that would be one of my projects for the future.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, an interesting way of approaching that.
Yeah, because
really
you see the research also, a researcher, you know, what he thinks or what she thinks, what is his or her approach to monuments or to sites or to artifacts. So it would be really a great idea to do that.
Yes, indeed. We have another question for Alessandra from Rosamund McKitterick. She says, thank you for a splendid set of presentations. I was fascinated by the identification of the photographer commissioned to make photographic records in the early years. Are there other instances in the BSR archive of such professional photographers being involved?
If we talk about the Libya, what I found out is that, you know, I dig out in the archives, and by looking at the correspondence, I realized that the photos that we attributed to Ward Perkins as photographers are not really taken. They were not taken by him. So were commissioned. Maybe sometimes were taken by him, but most of the times were commissioned. So it's interesting. That the more we dig out, the more we discover, so the more we can amend and enhance our records, as Caroline said about the IRT 2021 edition. It's a very meticulous work, and it requires obviously time to go through the documentation, but this is a discovery that was made recently, and we have to just go deep down and not what I'm trying to do is just not be on the surface of things, but try to dig out more and combine archival evidence with visual evidence. I hope that I answered the question.
Yes, Philip Kenrick just adds, he says, I would suspect that the 35mm photos were almost entirely by J.B. Ward Perkins, as he was a very keen photographer.
Yeah, it can be both. I mean, because we found letters or correspondence between John Bryan Ward Perkins and this Franco Liberati addressed as Nino, saying, can you please take these photographs and number them as 51, so with clear instructions. So it's it's amazing the things that you can discover.
Yeah, wonderful. Let's see. So we have a comment from Paul Bennett, just in answer to an earlier question about fieldwork in Libya. He says, fieldwork in the aftermath of Storm Daniel is presently taking place in and around Derna, led by Abdesalam Kawash, assisted in the UK by Ahmed Bouzayan. And a report on their work will hopefully be submitted to Libyan Studies soon, so we will be able to read about that work, hopefully in the next few months. And then, so we have one more question from Father John Salib. He says, many thanks for these splendid talks. In fact, I find that the two projects, Greek verse of Cyrenaica and Inscriptions of Roman Cyrenaica, as useful sources for research students. Are there any plans to have the two websites merged into one?
I may try to give a partial answer. In fact, we thought about that a long time ago, and the first step is that we prepared bibliographies together. That means if you open our corpus, IGCIR, you will find in the bibliography a very, very long list, and some papers or books are not activated. That means they are not mentioned in the study of the different inscriptions. We took the files of the bibliography for IRC and we added ours. The idea, Charlotte wants to do that once. I don't know when we shall be able to do it, but the idea is at least to have a common bibliography that would be accessible separately on a large platform InSlib that we wanted to have. I don't know whether this will be made once. That's another point that we have to think over. And about the preceding question, I may just mention that the French mission was eventually able to go back to Libya this year, at the end of June and beginning of July. We had a 2 weeks mission based at Apollonia to check what the state of things after the tempest, and also to make some field work. And there is a lot to do to be able again to work easily. But there is a small hope, because our government didn't allow us to go for so many years, and this year it was possible. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Catherine, for that detailed answer. So we have one last question from Khaled El Hadar. And they ask, is there a project to include all the inscriptions of Tripolitania in a new edition that includes Punic as well?
Well, it's an excellent question. There is certainly a plan to create a Punic platform, so Inscriptions of Punic Tripolitania, where we can collect and digitally publish all of the Punic material from Tripolitania, and bring that sort of into the conversation, so that the inscriptions are being considered alongside their Greek and Greek and Latin counterparts. And then there are also plans to create a platform, the Inscriptions of Libya platform, which would act as a common platform through which all of these digital publications could be searched simultaneously. So a platform that would bring all of the existing publications and future digital editions into one search capacity, one search engine, so that the material could be used across the different corpora, rather than just sort of within several different open web pages. So there are plans afoot for that, as well as a new edition of IRT as well. But certainly bringing all of the material together is our sort of combined long-term goal, I think, including the Punic.
Yes, well, that sounds wonderful, and I'm sure we will all really look forward to to seeing that someday. Right, so I think I will end the questions there. So I hope that everyone will join me in thanking our three speakers this evening. It's been really wonderful to hear all of your talks. So thank you very much, Catherine, Caroline, and Alessandra. Now, just before we wrap up, I do just want to make a quick announcement. I am very pleased to announce that our next event will be our annual lecture on Thursday, November the 7th, in person at the British Academy in London. We are extremely pleased and honored to have the esteemed author and BILNAS Council member Hisham Matar to speak about his latest novel, My Friends, which was recently longlisted for the prestigious Booker Prize. So please do look out for more details about this event to be advertised soon, and we will look forward to seeing many of you there. So thank you again, speakers, and thank you again, everyone, for joining us this evening, and have a good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.